And to unpack this further with me, to give us the full view, is Professor Nirmala Gopal, who is a criminologist from the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Prof, good evening. Thank you so much for your time. Perhaps to begin here, in just about every functioning democracy where the police approaches crime with such a heavy-handedness and it resulting in this sheer amount of killings of suspected criminals, there are questions that often raise about whether or not this is a covert exercise of extrajudicial killings. Is that perhaps indicative of where South Africa is, the fact that we haven't asked that question just yet and that it's not a part of the conversation, that we're so desensitized to crime that we're desperate for any means to get rid of it?
Good evening, Oliver, and good evening to your viewers. So I think, yeah, it's a very interesting question. And I'm, particularly within the context of South Africa, I think one of the, one fact about South Africa and its policing service is that it was one of the only institutions that was completely dismantled during the introduction of democracy, and we had a completely new policing service. We moved from the force to the service. And part of renaming it to the service meant that we were moving away from the whole notion of using force to arrest criminals in the way we treat prisoners, etc. So we just wanted to move away completely from the idea of force to a service. However, I think what we must understand is that crime in South Africa is very complex. We are still a democracy in transition, and being a democracy in transition, it means that we will generate a variety of crimes and criminals. And what we are noticing in South Africa is that criminals are becoming more brazen. There's no fear in terms of using firearms to get away with what they are doing. So coming back to whether South African Police Service is using a force that might not necessarily be reasonable, necessary, or proportionate, I think there would be various schools of thought on that. And one school of thought could be that it is possible that they are doing it and finding an easy way out to arrest criminals. The other one is that, they need to satisfy the South African community as well, because at this point in time, public confidence in policing is so low and people want to see perpetrators brought to book. So I think it's a little bit of a complex and a tricky situation.
Yeah. Is there a need for a change in tact to make sure that when police approach suspected gangs and criminals, that the approach is to get them alive and to get them prosecuted and arrested, because that gives the opportunity for law enforcement as well as the prosecuting authorities to be able to extract a greater deal of intelligence about criminal networks? That seems to be lost when gang leaders and suspected gang criminals are found dead every time the police approach them.
I mean, of course, that's the ideal. But we also know that criminals are very well equipped. They are well resourced. And the whole, it's like kill or be killed. And I think it's at that stage when police will decide to use force to arrest. But unfortunately, before arresting or during the process of arresting, the criminal might be injured. However, I beg to differ, on the issue of whether we should on whether we would be able to ascertain a body of intelligence from those that we arrest. Usually, and especially when we're looking at organized crime, and I think with organized crime, there's a great deal of violence that's involved. We know that those perpetrators hardly ever give information or provide intelligence that can be used to detect and/or eliminate crime in the future. I don't necessarily believe that that's the best way in which to gain intelligence. I think the crime intelligence usually is generated through other means, and one of it is through infiltrating communities and having highly skilled police agents, law enforcement agents who are able to infiltrate communities where this kind of intelligence can actually be generated.
Yeah. And just lastly, is there anything to be read into the fact that there is a statistical skew of this happening in KwaZulu-Natal as opposed to other provinces?
That's a very interesting question as well, because when you think of, for example, the high rate of gangsterism in the Western Cape, and traditionally KZN is not known to have large numbers of gangs, and you wonder why our statistics are skewed. So that's a good question. What are law enforcement agents not perhaps doing in the Western Cape that we are doing, or what are KZN law enforcement agents doing that officials in, for example, Western Cape are doing or not doing? So I think it's also very tricky. And unless we have the most finite details of what is happening and how it is happening, it's actually quite difficult to make predictions.
Yeah. Prof Nirmala Gopal, thank you so much for your time and your insights. I really do appreciate it.